Hi, I want to make a video on the subject of cause and effect, how things inevitably have the same cause, the beginning of all causes, the idea that there isn't a cause that's caused um, that is a first cause that caused all these things to happen, how that inevitably causes a funny, causes a causes all these actions that we interact with to have the same effect because it's all part of one initial cause that was brought into existence. Um, Obviously, answering the question of the first cause can be a difficult one that can probably be deduced logically, just thinking about it. But it's something that we haven't really have a foundation on, and we may have the answer, we just don't realize it yet. But it's about figuring out a lot of these things that we can see and interact with, and um, lead to and get a lot of hypotheses and theorizing about a lot of these things and how they can come into lead us to some conclusions that may be reasonable to a lot of these philosophical questions that can only be answered by um, conjecture, just assuming a lot of things based on other evidence that doesn't necessarily have a correlative effect that's directly correlated to something, but it's something that we can deduce logically, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be proof of an answer other than the proof of the logic that we've figured out using these deductions and figuring these things out. I've mentioned this before, this idea that a lot of these things have a lot of these causes, since even though one cause in and of itself um, has more of an effect, obviously, when it comes to the value of a specific sentience or living thing, it can experience one cause. We obviously can deduct that the cause can be, it's about making distinctions, though, I think. And that we can, and going back to that, we can deduce that obviously this thing has more of an effect on a sentient thing, but all these things are generally speaking the same thing. And while the sentience, the value mechanism that breaks the whole fundamental mechanism of cause and effect, at least when you're thinking about all these things having an effect, all these things have, even though it doesn't really mean much, have an effect, but they're just along the same string or the same line as the initial cause, and that's what it's following, because everything is inevitable and it's going to happen um, one way or another, and it's something that's just part of the cause. And since we can say obviously this thing and deduce it and put it off and say yes, this one thing had an effect more than these other things. This thing in and of itself caused this thing to experience more feeling or reaction. This thing caused more of a reaction out of this thing. The reaction that caused that thing was caused by some other reaction, but the reaction itself can be singled out and said, yes, this has more of an effect. But all these things have a similar effect when it comes to the general idea of something leading to something else, because these things generally have the same effect because something led to another. A pin dropping, butterfly effect, obviously didn't have an effect, but it had an effect because it affected and allowed this certain thing to happen. If it didn't happen this way, we don't necessarily know, so we can only deduce that it had something to do with it, and it did. Maybe it wouldn't have happened exactly the same way, but it was all these things contribute to things happening the way that they happened, regardless of how small of an effect it has. Even doing nothing has its effects. Even just sitting there, you're sitting, you can be doing something else. If you have something else you could be doing, then it's something that is having an effect. So if there's something else you could be doing, or something else could have happened, you're having an effect. That's pretty much the a reasonable conclusion to come to. Like that's kind of like what I'm saying. We can't figure these things out, so we just do logical conclusions, sort of like that. If you're allowed to do something else, these things are synonymous with, if you could be doing something else, synonymous with the fact that something is going to happen. Um, hmm, I lost my train of thought for a second. But yes, the basic idea is if you could be doing something else, um, everything was meant to happen that way. I'm sorry, this is what happens. Anyway, so yeah, it's these things are inevitable and they're gonna happen regardless. all events are the same. If you could be doing anyway, I'm losing my train of thought completely. So um, yes, I mean, I don't know what else to say on this. These things all inevitably lead from one thing to another, and all these events have the same effect. So cause and effect. But yeah, I mean, it's an idea I've been over before. These things have the same effect. And if you could be doing something else, it had an effect. And that effect is built off of a stream of things happening based on an initial cause that caused these effects to happen. There we go. But anyway, I don't think there's anything else to say on this subject. But yes, these things, all events are the same, but like closing it off, you can say yes. If you close off that event, that yes in and of itself had an effect more, it caused more of an effect to a value thing. And if you are just experiencing, generally speaking, these things are all pretty much the same thing. Because unless these things don't mean anything unless they're causing some feeling thing, experiencing a feeling, which has value, and that's what the cause and effect almost gets confused with. Yes, all these things are different effects, intrinsically in and of themselves, but that doesn't mean that they aren't part of the same string, and all these things are just a mechanism and built from the same mechanism that created them. The same thing that causes cause and effect mechanism, pretty much synonymous because they came from the same source, generally speaking. It's a different thing, but it's of the um, same source. It came from the same thing, came from the same origins, and that's exactly the thing, point. And so that value thing can confuse it, but yes, these things in and of themselves can be seen to be um, um, sorry, I'm just kind of lost. These things can be seen as individual things or as a stream of things based on an initial stream of cause and effect, and these things can be seen as individual, intrinsic, fundamental things that had a cause and effect, and these things are that stream is what it really is, but obviously it can be seen as an individual event, and you can deduce it based on small events that you can say and pick out. And like I've mentioned before, you can pick out and see what one thing led to another. And you can say, I can only go so far back, so I'm just going to do that. These things that obviously led to this thing happening, at least generally speaking, to the degree that it happened. But there's other ways of doing this as well, and that's you can look at it like it's affecting a value thing, and that's when you can deduce that yes, this effect had more of an effect on a value thing. This individual thing had a more of a push. This push caused this thing to happen. This push was bigger. You can look at things like that. The push was bigger more than anything. Um, that's really all the way you can see it. The push was bigger, more significant, but it was all still part of the same stream. And generally speaking, it was going to happen anyway. And once it was going to happen anyway, it's part of the same stream that was going to happen. And there's no real reason to look at it any other way as an effect that happened. And the only reason we look at these things is the effects and causes and the lessons we have to learn and the understanding of consequences. And we can realize that this effect is something that we can control, and we can try to change that effect or the thing that may happen by, but hasn't happened, but is inevitably going to happen. Not the thing that you describe, but something is going to happen. And once it happens, that's when you look back and say that it was inevitable. It wasn't inevitable, but the thing that happened wasn't. You'll know exactly what was inevitable once it happens. So that's a way of looking at it, of understanding it better. Yes, the value thing does have an effect on the way you can look at these things. So anyway, These things are important. So I don't think there's anything else to say on the subject. Anyway, um, so yeah, if there's anything else I have to say on this subject, there's always another time and place, or another time at same place. Anyway, thank you, and until next time, bye.